So this week's theme then is shadows, and I'm going to begin with a little bit of revision. I'm going to do some demonstrating, painting a still life, working with these objects, modelling them with light and shade, and then looking at how colour is managed in order to create shadow planes on these objects, but also the shadows that are cast by the objects. And I hope to develop that a bit and look at colour and shadows, impressionism, warm and cool light, and so on. But I think it's quite good to start just with some basics. As I say, a little bit of revision. So I've covered my canvas with some grey paint, so that we're working on something neutral. And for these objects, I've got a blue cup. I'm using a fairly limited palette. I'm working with cadmium orange, some ultramarine, and a little bit of cerulean. I've got my lemon ochre, yellow ochre rather, and some titanium white. So to get myself started, I made a bit of a black brown, which I'm going to sketch out the teapot with. And then for the objects, so for the teapot, I've made a shadow colour and a light colour. The light colour was just the ochre with some white. And then I put some ochre together actually with a grey that I made from the ultramarine and the orange. So that's how I made a shadow colour. So the teapot has got a light colour and a shadow colour. And the cup similarly, I had to use both the blues for the lighter colour and the blue and the orange, the ultramarine and the orange for the shadow colour. And then the table itself, which is an orange sort of colour, that was orange with a bit of ochre, and then orange and blue with almost no white. So that's my palette, and let's take a couple of approaches to these objects. For the teapot, what I'm going to do is sketch out its shape and its shadow using the sort of grey that I made from the ultramarine and the cadmium orange. So there's maybe a little bit of revision here because I'm hoping that you feel free to work with the theme of shadows in all sorts of ways, and I've illustrated the theme a bit on the email brief, looking at the way different artists might work the shadows. I've just gone for some straightforward still life objects to make some points really about almost some technical points, and then you can take them further with your choice of subject. So sketch out my shape, and maybe with the same brown-grey, I'll just put the cast shadow of the teapot and its spout down here. So I'll come back to it all really, because I thought it might be interesting just to start with something monochrome, and then develop that into colour. So even at this stage here with my grey, I can look with my eyes half closed, and the kind of belly of the teapot, these round forms, these either spherical forms like that or these cylindrical forms of the spout. I'm just working in a bit of the grey so that I can find some darker planes. So just working in monochrome, I can model the 3 dimensions of this teapot just with those darker tones, with those dark planes. So that's kind of obvious. That's what we do with light and shadow, and I can go on refining that. there's a bit of a line along the edge where the teapot meets the table, and I think the shadow is actually darker. The cast shadow is darker than the shadows on the object in this instance. So that's a bit of monochrome modelling. But into that now I'm going to put those two colours that I mixed, and I'll need to kind of float that a bit. Gosh, that doesn't look dark enough at all, does it, when I held it up? Well, this is going to be interesting. So when I held it up against the shadows, it really was dark. So let's hope that when I put on the lighter teapot colour, it's so light that I don't look silly. So those are my darks. As I gauge them, but because I'm a little bit nervous of making a mistake in front of you, I am letting some of the grey mix, because that might save my embarrassment. So put them on and clean my brush and dry my brush. And now here's the lighter teapot colour. So I'm aiming to give a kind of simple explanation of some of the principles, and to that end I've only done a light and dark colour for the teapot, because I want to go on to other things like the cast shadow and so on. And I've not actually got as far as a highlight. But as I say, this is a bit of revision as well, because if I am wrong about some of these colours, then the demonstration can develop into how to adjust the colours once you see how they work with each other. But actually it's not as bad as I first thought. I had actually added quite a lot of orange to those shadow colours because that's what I saw when I held up my palette knife against the objects. But I wonder if I put a little bit too much orange in. Anyway, we'll see, because the process isn't finished now, because what I need to do next is put on some of the background colour. Not the background or the table. And it may be that once I get that on, hopefully what you're seeing here is a good demonstration of how colours affect each other. So I chose this orange table. I even cleaned it so there were no confusing stains around it that would change, or that would complicate the shadow. So that's not too bad. It's quite a bright colour for the table. And I've mixed a version of the shadow. So this table colour, as I said, I made it with some cadmium orange and a bit of lemon ochre. And in order to find the colour for the shadow of it, I've again used the cadmium orange, but I've mixed a bit of blue into it. So that's the colour of my shadow. And I think that looks okay from your point of view, from my point of view. If it was too colourful, I think it's quite good actually. But if it were too colourful, I've made it, as I say, from the orange and the blue. And I might want to neutralise it. I would want to neutralise it if it was too strong. The only other thing I want to do, the other point I'd like to make, is shadows often have, or generally have, soft edges. That's what sort of distinguishes maybe shadow from a form. And as I'm here in the studio, and we've actually got a couple of lights on these objects, so there are even sort of second shadows, double shadows. So I can use the wet and wet situation to put in. I'm letting the paint mix now, so I'm not putting fresh paint. I'm letting it mix on the painting, so I can put a second shadow. I can even, if I thought that my main shadow was too too sharp, then I can actually soften its edge, just by blending it a bit. So that's one approach to that object. Working with, in this case, adding greys to the colour of the teapot to make it darker and to neutralise it a bit. And with the case of the orange tabletop, I added its complementary opposite, the blue, to make it darker and less colourful. And there is this business about warm light, cool shadows. So that would apply here. I've got a yellowish spotlight casting a warm light, and the shadows which are generated by the objects are cooler. I mean, I've gone from a bright orange, a warm orange, to a not only darker, but a less orange brown, which is made by adding the cool blue. Now, just to try and be interesting, to develop this whole theme and a different approach, for the cup, I've mixed a lighter and darker blue, and rather than sketch out some outlines, I thought it might be quite interesting just to paint some shapes. So I'll put it here. It may not be in exactly the right place for the still life setup, but so rather than do an outline and start with a sort of tonal, a monochrome introduction, this time I thought it would be good just to paint some of the dark shapes. And that might be a little bit of an illustration of colour, how colour and tone might work together. Bit tricky though, because there's a lot of reflections in this cup. So those might be my main dark shapes. Clean my brush, and let's get on some of the light. That's inside here. And I'm hoping there might be some value in this, in showing you how, particularly once I get on the negative shape of the table and its shadow, just how much the brighter colour, the brighter lighter colour, and its darker neutral relative, just seeing how they work together. So in a way, it's seeing colour and tone, or making a kind of translation of colour and tone. So my light areas are more colourful, they're bluer. The shadow planes of the cup are darker and less colourful. And the same will apply once I get to the shadow, which probably I should have done first, shouldn't I? Let's just do that for now, until we get to the shadow cast. So you might find it's worth doing a little bit of still life to clarify some of these points about colour. And also hopefully you'll be thinking in terms of how to use shadows and how not only how to manage the colour in the way that I'm describing here, but also just thinking about shadows as a theme. So if I want to create an image with a particular effect, maybe it's going to be very dramatic, and I'll use light and shadow almost as a theatre director might do in order to heighten the drama of the painting. Or, as I'm going to talk about in a moment, I might want to think in terms of colour and manipulating colour, not just to get the more colourful light areas and the less colourful neutralised shadows, but actually to introduce colour into those shadows, as, for example, an impressionist might do. So there we go, I'm more or less done with my still life. A lot of that isn't new, but it's sometimes worth seeing these things and, having them as an explanation of the basics. Modelling light and shade, shadows cast, soft edges to the shadows, and using complementary colours to neutralise and darken the shadow areas. So now that that's all done, I think I did better with a cup. Some of this could be much darker. So I would remix that and find a slightly darker point, maybe somewhere between my greys and the neutralised mixture that I made. So let me pause a minute, and I'm going to put a white piece of card under these objects, just to show you and talk to you a little bit about the temperature of the light. So you can see that I've put a bit of white card under the cup, and the shadow now cast by the cup and by the teapot spout is a different colour because it's now cast onto that white surface. So I'm actually going to change my painting, and I'm going to paint some of the white card and a new mixture for the shadow. So the white card I'm making from a grey, it's an off-white, the orange and the ultramarine with lots of white, and then the shadow will also be made from that mixture. But I think given that this is all wet, it would be worth taking some of that off before putting on my new lighter colour. I'll just wipe that back a bit. See how I get on. In fact, I might as well take that away and redo it. So let's see. So it's not a pure white, it's a grey white. I better get a bit of perspective in as well, hadn't I? So again, that's kind of revision. The colour of the cast shadow, it doesn't go that high, does it? Never mind, let's pretend it's a longer bit of card. The colour of the cast shadow is determined by the surface, and as I shall go on to, maybe the temperature of the light. So about here, I'm getting a lot of mixing, aren't I? Never mind. Get a bit of the light round there. And then this new shadow colour, which is much more of a grey. So you can see the shadow there, that was a brown, basically. But I need a new shadow colour for this surface. And it's made from the same complementary colours that gave me the white card, which isn't actually purely white. So that could be a little bit darker, couldn't it? I need to mix that grey a little bit darker. Maybe it's because my white is so light as well. And the point at which my shadow of the teapot spout is cast across the white card, that also needs to change. So let's take some of that away. So you might think of if you were to paint a landscape and you'd be painting trees casting shadows across grass, then across grass and then across a path, then you might be thinking of adjusting the colour of the shadow according to what it's falling onto. When it's falling onto the green grass, it's going to be a darker green and a less colourful green, a neutralised green. When it's falling onto let's call it a grey path, it's going to be a sort of grey neutral shadow, a bit like what I'm trying to do here. So that's a little bit messy because of my mixtures. Let's pause while I improve those mixtures. So I just darkened the grey because I want to improve those shadows a bit. And I think that's a good thing to see, that you can get these colours mixed, and especially with oil paint, you can adjust them. And colour in shadows, is relative. And what I'm demonstrating here is colour in relation to light and shadow. It's not until you see these colours side by side on the canvas that you can see whether you've judged them correctly. And so to be able to adjust them retrospectively, or having seen them in action, is important. So the other couple of things I wanted to mention then, I said about warm light, cool shadows. There are, I might include some images on the email. You can look up all sorts of things online where colourful lights have been cast on objects. A green light will cast a red shadow, and so on. So the whole business of complementary colours, and you think of all sorts of theatrical lighting where both coloured lights are used and colourful shadows are generated. But maybe the most relevant in terms of sort of painting traditions would be to think of Impressionism. Actually, maybe look at those images that I included by the contemporary painter Andrew Macara, who does fantastic children in action paintings, but always with bright light. So they're either swimming in the sea, and there's a lot of them sledging in the snow. And, we've all seen that, experienced that extraordinary phenomenon of blue shadows on snow. And I suppose it is the orange, yellow sun and all that white, all that neutral white, which results in the shadows appearing to be blue or purpley blue. So the complementary opposite of the yellow or orange light is what comes out in the blue shadows in snow. But Andrew McCarr is great because he also does tennis players on bright orange clay courts and so on. And an impressionist, so if I were an impressionist here and I wanted to extend the colour in my painting, I mean, this is not what I'm seeing, but I think once you start working like this, you do begin to see these phenomena. For my teapot, casting a shadow onto my orange table, what I want to do as an impressionist is increase the amount of blue in my shadow. So let me have a little bit of a go at that. This will be live and trial and error. So that I'm putting blue in there now. It's just making it fairly grey at the moment. But I'll start with that because what I know is that if I'm going to make my shadows more colourful, I can't just extend the colour in the shadow. I've also got to extend the colour in the table itself. Now I put a little bit in there and actually that looks all right, but I think I want to increase it a little bit further. What I'm trying to do by trial and error is see how much blue and also see what sort of a blue. I've just gone for the ultramarine, but I think I can get a bit more in there, and that's okay. But I think, and this would make sense logically, because that's bluer, I think my orange table surface now needs to be more orange. Oh, and look at that, I've run out of orange. Never mind. I found some here. So I've still got some pre-mixed colour for the table, and I think I'll try that out. And again, this is where, wet in wet oil painting really comes into its own, because I can modify these colours. And I hope that's convincing. What I've done is I've really stretched the colour both in the shadow and also in the surface itself. And having done that, probably I would want to stretch the colour in the object as well. To that end, I think my colourful shadows on the teapot aren't too bad. But it may be that the lighter part of the teapot isn't colourful enough. And so I think I should try and extend that. And that's the point really. If you're talking about colour and shadows, not quite the right colour, I might need a bit of orange. Talking about colour and shadows, what you're talking about is heightening, extending the amount of colour that is there. And we do get that experience outdoors, I think, in particular. I don't know if I'm able to explain why that is, but I think it is a phenomenon, especially as I've described the whole colour in shadows on snow. But I think what the Impressionists were working with is a kind of heightened experience of colour in the outdoors. So I'm just making that last point, that because I think there's more colour in the shadows on my teapot already, some of the lighter part of the teapot is also now getting an increased colour. And provided I do that together, it's a relative thing. Extending the colour both in the light areas and in the shadows is keeping the balance of colour working. So I think that's as much as I want to show you. I've tried to just remind you really about colour in shadow, mixing colours, complementary colours to produce darker neutrals for shadow planes and also for shadows cast. The colours I used to make the cast shadow on the orange table were based on complementaries, orange and blue. When I put the cup onto the neutral white, I got a much more neutral shadow. And then I've just been exploring the idea of increasing the colour in the shadows, but that requires a balance. So if I increase the colour in the shadows, I need to increase it also in the object and in the surface of the table. So go forth now and take shadows as your theme, and with these basic ideas about mixing colour, you can hopefully use shadows in whatever way you like to create dramas, or to perhaps work with manipulating colour to a particular end. All right, see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.